Okay, I'm going to provide you some context for the questions that you're going to be asked on the Supreme Court, the last test grade of this particular semester, or test grade questions. So they are: what is the significance of the John Marshall's ruling in Marbury versus Madison? I'm going to provide some more context of Marbury versus Madison, some examples for you to be able to think about. And then the idea of precedent in Supreme Court. What is that? Why is the idea of how precedent important and how the Supreme Court functions? How has precedent functioned or influenced recent court decisions? We talked about precedent when we went through some of the Supreme Court notes and activities, and so I want to review that as well. And that's the purpose of this video. So I'm going to hide my fat head and look at this a little bit. So let's take a look at first of all the Marbury versus Madison. So again, this guy Marbury was upset. He wanted to be a judge. And this is, a long time ago, after Adams had ran to be reelected, President lost. He issues a bunch of appointments for men to be justices of the peace. And most of the commissions were prepared, but President Jefferson takes over. Thomas Jefferson, he refuses to send them. So Marbury sues for his commission. Now, the thing of it is that it starts in a court that isn't regular, right? It starts at the Supreme Court, not at a lower court, because when you in 1789, Congress said, well, if you're going to issue a mandamus or a legal order, it could start at the Supreme Court. So he argued that he was entitled to his writ of commission because it had already been created; it just wasn't delivered. So he argued the Supreme Court had the power to issue this writ. That would make him justice of the peace, as Adams had appointed him. So it's very difficult because John Marshall is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place because he had been appointed by Adam. He had been appointed, so it's very difficult to. It was a thorny decision, but the Supreme Court agreed Marbury had the right to receive that commission because Adams had given it; it just hadn't been delivered. They were signed and sealed and everything official. But the Supreme Court gets its power disagreed that the Supreme Court had the power to issue the writ. The Supreme Court gets its power from the Constitution, according to John Marshall, and the Constitution says only certain kinds of cases can serve the Supreme Court. So that law that says, well, only the Supreme Court can issue writs of mandamus or is an original jurisdiction, and Congress Congress had the power to allow more kinds of cases to serve the Supreme Court. So it said they cannot help Marbury get its commission. Again, go back to the idea that Congress, go back to this idea that, again, that this is very important. Go back to the idea that the Supreme Court is an appellate court, a court of appellate jurisdiction with very little original or first jurisdiction. Very little original or first jurisdiction. That is a very important point to be made. Now, back to this. So what? So the idea that the Supreme Court has final say about what this Constitution is called, again, judicial review. That's the most important thing to take away from Marbury versus Madison. Judicial review lets the judicial branch do two things. There's the Supreme Court. Interpret the Constitution, decide what it means. I told you that Supreme Court does not take on cases usually unless they're of constitutional issue is involved. Unless they're in their original jurisdiction is laid out in the Constitution, state versus state, ambassador, but that's very few cases. And then stop the executive and legislative branch from doing things that go against the Constitution. So in other words, the power to rule on laws. So this cements the judicial branch as equal with the other two branches of government, very primarily because they have the power of judicial review. That's the significance of the impact of this ruling. The significance is the idea of judicial review, the precedent of judicial review, and the Supreme Court has final say on whether laws are constitutional or unconstitutional. The Supreme Court has exercised this. The second part of this question then is to say examples of the impact of this ruling. Okay. Well, let's go through a couple. Let's look at some precedents that have been set. Flag laws. Congress cannot just think about a couple of these. Congress could, Supreme Court said that Congress cannot make it a crime to burn the U.S. flag. So Congress has to act, and the change would require a constitutional amendment, but there's really not enough support for that. So 1989, they ruled that flag burning is a crime. Line in a veto. This is where, and I think I talked about this when we talked about Congress. The president would have certain powers to cross out certain pieces of legislation, certain line items and budgets that he didn't like, and so on, allowing the president to veto part of a bill, passing the rest. Well, the Congress cannot give the president the power to do that. The president must sign a law or return it to Congress, not change it all by himself. So really, what they did is the members of Congress reacted by revising the law so that the president will have to quickly approve the changes before they take effect. The legislative process is notoriously slow. No, the new version never passed Congress. So lying in a veto is still not a thing. Lying about military service awards a crime, a Valor Act in 2005. They ruled that it's against the First Amendment of freedom of speech to make that the case. So Congress cannot make it a crime to lie about receiving a military medal. Free speech means the government cannot decide some lies are punishable. Congress, again, this year's the check and balance. They revised the law so that it's a crime to benefit financially. So it's a crime to benefit financially about a lie from the military honors. This targets people who commit fraud, not people who are just speaking. So, but again, that law hasn't passed through Congress yet. It's still held up. The Voting Rights Act Amendment of 1970, again, the Voting Rights Act Amendment of 1970 requires states to change the Voting Act from 21 to 18. Oh, now here we go. The Constitution did not give the power to do that. So what was the reaction? The reaction of them was that the 26th Amendment had to pass. We just learned about that. So the state cannot deny their vote to anyone 18 or over. You don't need to use all of these examples. Just a couple when you're discussing your short answer. The other question is, how is the idea of precedent important how the Supreme Court functions? Well, Marbury versus Madison in and of itself is precedent that set up the importance of judicial review. Remember that, and I'm going to review this with you. Go back to my presentation from the other day. Precedent is how the Supreme Court bases its decisions on the Constitution, and precedent or previous rulings. Okay, where does that precedent come from? That precedent, make sure that you make mention of where does that precedent come from. That precedent comes from majority opinions. The majority opinion is the precedent. Okay, for the reason for the decision, the legal rationale, the legal basis for the decision is the precedent. Okay, it is the precedent, and so cases like Brown versus Board of Education, Roe versus Wade. I'm thinking of major landmark cases. It's my brain is the big four: Matt versus Ohio, the search and seizure case, Miranda versus Arizona. These are precedent that have been set and been overturned. We did a little bit with precedent already. Marbury versus Madison in and of itself is precedent. So in the majority opinion of the current courts establishes new precedents for future court decisions sometimes. So like when opinions are issued, they often become precedent for future decisions. Now the court can choose to change precedent, but the precedent is what the rulings are based on. So again, precedent is a key because it bases many of its rulings upon its decisions and cases that dealt with a similar issue. Precedent cases that dealt with a similar issue. They're based on the majority opinions of the court can establish cases, can establish precedent. And so that's where they're at. So what's the importance then? The idea of precedent, they look back to precedent for how the case functions, for how law functions, and how precedent has functioned or influenced recent court decisions. Again, looking at a precedent is just to say that precedent is always present, so to speak, because every time a case is issued, a decision is issued, majority opinion, it has the possibility to be a precedent. Okay, it has the possibility to be a precedent. So those major cases act as precedent, and to overturn that can sometimes be difficult or controversial. Sometimes the court is hesitant. Sometimes they'll make little changes in it, but it's very important in how it functions, how the Supreme Court functions.